Hi everyone, so today's video is going to be a big fat summer writing update, even though it is basically the middle of October. Let's start with Fostered, since that's basically all I'm working on these days. So the first book let's update on is Feeding Habits. So I wrote Feeding Habits mostly in July, so I don't really even remember the experience. I was writing a chapter in Feeding Habits, which was supposed to be the final chapter of the book. I'm kind of overthinking that, and I might not even make it the last chapter, but we'll see. And that chapter was supposed to be chapter 10, which was called Swan Song. And I was rereading it after one evening. I was feeling pretty emo about writing, and with Feeding Habits at the time, I was pretty mad at the project. I couldn't make it work. It was just not happening. And when I reread it, I got even more mad at myself, but for the opposite reason. It was a really good chapter. I was frustrated at myself for being so mean, even though that was just, I think, maybe at the end of June. I feel like I've matured a lot as a writer. This is not a set in stone thing. With writing, nothing is really set in stone for me, but I find since this experience, since reading that chapter and having that like visceral annoyed feeling at myself, I no longer really hold it against myself when I don't do something perfectly or up to my standards that I'd set out when it comes to writing. When I did the reread of Swan Song, which was 10, I decided to reread 8 and 9. And when I read chapters 8 and 9, 8 is land mammal, 9 is something held. When I reread them, there was something wrong between chapters 8 and 9. That led me to writing a new chapter 9 that would go between, the new one would be right in the middle, which would be the new 9 called Initial Condition. So this chapter is actually one of my favorite things I think that I've ever written. Even though the process I think took about 2.5 or 3 weeks to draft the chapter, that is one of the fastest drafting times I've had for a Feeding Habits chapter. It follows this really circular structure where everything that happens in the chapter orbits a central theme. And I noticed that that's actually how I've been writing all of the Feeding Habits chapters without realizing it. So Initial Condition is all about Harrison. So if you didn't catch like the last writing update, Chapter 10 of Swan Song is in a different character's point of view. That's in Lonan's point of view. We jumped back into his head after many, many chapters in Harrison's head. So I decided I needed to actually go and finish some stuff in Harrison's point of view. There was something missing. And to go back into his head months and months and months after I had left it was such an experience. I hadn't written with him since January at that point, and I really did the bulk of drafting for Initial Condition in July. So it was quite a big gap, I think about half a year. The chapter ends up being about 8,500 words, and I wrote it over a few consistent writing sessions over about 3 weeks, like I mentioned. And the book is now just over 62,000 words, which is so exciting. I decided to incorporate a little reading into the writing updates just so you guys can like see what I'm doing. Usually when I'm on my blog, I will leave excerpts. So this is one of them that I featured. And this is a scene where Harrison's mother, her name is Susanna, she's like trying to make him feel better because he's in a depressed episode. And even though she's not religious at all, she's kind of at like her last resort. And this is what ends up happening. Susanna does not believe in God. But after her son failed to rebound back into the clean elastic he once was, she gathered whatever friends she had. Friends is a strong word. They were mostly acquaintances from the building, people she met while drying her clothes at the laundromat or buying rounds of Avor cheese at the supermarket, and started a prayer circle. Harrison lay in the middle of his bed, staring somewhere between the ceiling and Mars. To you do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To you do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping in this valley of tears, they said, heads bowed stiffly as if hiding from one another. All Harrison could think of somewhere in his body and somewhere not was banished. Me, I exiled my own damn self. After Susanna shut his door and served lemonade in the kitchen. So that's basically the vibe of the entire chapter. Harrison's like, I don't want to talk to you people. That's what's going on with Feeding Habits. Since then, I have not drafted it. So since July, it's now October. I haven't touched it. Feeding Habits is like a really mentally exhausting book to work on. And I also decided, like, instead of trying to rush finishing it, I was initially going to just do that chapter 10 in Lonan's point of view was just going to be like maybe 20,000 words where there would have been chapters. I think I'm going to keep the traditional structure with the chapters at that third part, which is where Swan Song actually is. It's the entire third part of the book. So we'll have to see how it goes, but it's almost been 2 years, like, since I started this book. I guess about a year and a half, technically speaking, but I think by the time I finish it, it will be about 2 years of drafting, which is a long time. I'm really proud of this chapter. It reminded me of what it felt like to enjoy writing again in Feeding Habits, because as you know from so many of my videos, drafting Feeding Habits has been a disaster. So it was nice to have a little peace for a second. So the next thing I want to talk about is something I mentioned in the last writing update, which I think I filmed in May. I was talking about Moth Work 3. The book Feeding Habits that I just mentioned is the second book in a series. The first book is called Moth Work, and so second book is Feeding Habits. I was thinking I was going to write a third one, make it a trilogy. You know how the original second plan for Fostered was to create a trilogy, so why not write another one is what I thought. And then I realized it's probably not going to happen, and that's because when I started writing Seventh Virtue, I just didn't want to write another miserable Moth Work book. Moth Work was difficult enough to write. Feeding Habits has been such a pain in my ass, and I don't think I want to do it again for number 3. Plans changed. Feeding Habits causes me emotional pain. I want to avoid it as much as possible. So let's jump into Seventh Virtue, the fun book, the book that is there for me. This book is going extremely well. I had taken a break from it for a couple of months. I started it up again after I finished Initial Condition for Feeding Habits because I find that I'm rotating between the two projects. And since then, I've had multiple 5K word days where I just sit down and write so much in one day because this book is so easy to write. It's writing itself. I don't need to do anything. All I have to do is sit down and there it goes on the page. The manuscript is just over 45,000 words right now. I started it in May, so that is extremely fast for me. My original goal was actually to hit 50,000 words by the end of August, but that didn't happen because I was doing a cross-country move, and even though I tried so hard, I just couldn't do it. Before I moved, so before the end of August, I hit 40,000 words. I pushed the 50K goal to September. I still didn't make it, and now it's October 9th, and I'm hoping I can get the 50,000 words by the end of the month. I only have 5,000 more words to go, but I'm extremely busy with school. Something I love about Seventh Virtue is that it's really taught me how to enjoy drafting again, because I didn't think that was possible. I just thought I'd be stuck being miserable writing novels, and then I realized, oh, maybe it's because you're writing the wrong kind of novels. I'm not even sure I really want to write literary fiction novels at the moment. I'm not interested in it. It's very difficult for me to get into literary fiction novels for a whole plethora of reasons that I think I would have to make an entire video about. Another thing about Seventh Virtue is that this book is extremely long. We're 45,000 words into the manuscript and the book hasn't really even started yet. I realized because when I was younger, I used to write extremely long books. My longest book is about 200,000 words and it took me about 8 months to draft that. I thought that I just was incapable of writing really long books anymore. And then I realized, no, it was because I switched genres. And ever since I started writing genre fiction again, especially this is fantasy, oh my goodness, there is no way that this book is going to be under 100,000 words. I don't know what I'm going to do because I have barely done anything in the book and it is so long. I'm actually really excited about it. I haven't written a book that's over 100,000 words in years, and so I think it's just going to be really exciting. I've also realized a really interesting thing, which is that I can rewrite my favorite parts of this series. So all these books that I'm talking about are part of this gigantic series called Fostered. I talked about it in the birthday video. I will link that. But now I can rewrite my favorite scenes from the early books that I had written when I was 13, 14, 15, 16, and I can kind of adultify them into Seventh Virtue because they were obviously from a much younger genre category at the time. But I can put my favorite, most iconic Fostered scenes back into this book. And so I've slowly made the goal to go through all of the old books, reread all of the old books and take note of the scenes that brought me a lot of joy because I don't have a really great memory when it comes to my books. So I'm currently almost done reading book 1. I have already implemented one scene from, I actually think it was book 3, funnily enough, because that's the book I remember the most, even though it is the longest. It's so fun to rewrite my favorite scenes. It's going back to the best times of writing, but now doing it with more knowledge on how to write like what I had initially wanted when I was 13 and didn't really know what I was doing. I want to read an excerpt from Seventh Virtue because this one is just funny. We'll just see how different this is in comparison to feeding habits. The room is large. 2 double beds sprawl from the walls like white piano keys, and at least 4 portraits of Renaissance-era women gild the walls. Harrison's eyes land on the gem of all gems, the most important thing he's seen since re-entering the present, a coffee machine. That's actually a detail I stole from book 1. You're kidding me, he says in gleeful disbelief, setting his half-shrugged-off jacket onto the settee in the foyer. Foyer? Foyer? I don't know. He fumbles for the coffee machine, punching all its buttons, cranking open its plastic flap. It's a shitty little thing, but it'll work. It's 4 a.m. Foster's voice makes Harrison jump. He's been so engrossed analyzing the machine that he's barely noticed Foster and how he immediately jumps to disinfect the room with a packet of Huggies. Where did you get those? Harrison points to the pastel packet. Foster snatches them back, defensive. I have my sources. Can I have one? Why? To wipe the drool off your face? Take a shower, babe. Harrison smiles. Babe? 4 a.m. Foster is frisky. Foster narrows his eyes. You're judging my 4 a.m. habits? You're about to overdose on caffeine. Harrison unfurls a cup from the neat stack of 3 next to the machine. You're absolutely correct about that. He steps into the bathroom and fills the coffee pot with water. The less I sleep, the better of a mood I'm in. Are you sure about that? The last time you got 2 hours of sleep, you drowned my pothos cuttings in soda water. Harrison dumps coffee grounds into the machine's basket. It's not my fault you lined them up against the windowsill like some herby front line. They were blocking my light, and you only needed that much light because you bought a disco ball to hang in the middle of our living room. You couldn't have stuck it in your bedroom like a normal person. That's my disco ball. Have you seen the disco ball in my videos? That's my disco ball. I also do that a lot, where I put myself into this book. Harrison finishes up with the machine, presses the start button. Is it my fault for wanting to dance with somebody in the middle of my apartment? To feel the heat with somebody? Under a $2 disco ball that you found on the side of the road? Yes, Harrison, yes. So that's Seventh Virtue. It brings me a lot of joy. Let's move on to short stories. So I've been trying to write a short story a month. So in May, I wrote a short story called What Leaves Her. It's about 1,100 words, and it's about a teenage girl who works at an amusement park carousel. She contemplates motherhood. So in June, I wrote a short story called Jeremy. This is actually flash fiction, and it's 567 words. This is the log line. A cake decorator who insists the name Jeremy is the most difficult to write on cakes must decorate a cake for a child named Jeremy. In July, I wrote a short story called The Window of a Stranger's House, and fun fact, I think this was my very first idea for a short story, and I'd gotten it, I think, when I was 16, and I definitely would not have been able to write it when I was 16. I barely was able to write it this time around. It just is over 2,200 words, and the log line is a single middle-aged woman craving touch finds inspiration in the couple that lives across her apartment. In August, I wrote a short story called Ninth Life, and really this was just an attempt to not miss my streak, which is fair. You know, Jeremy was only 567 words. So Ninth Life, the log line is a woman buries her shared pet cat and is relieved. And this is actually narrated in the form of voicemail. I just literally wrote on my phone. I don't know the word count. I had to get something done for August. It was the last day of August, like at 9 p.m. And I just needed to write something. So I wrote the short story. It is not very long. It's probably maybe 300 words. In September, so very recently, I wrote a short story called Eat Well. This is just under 1,500 words. As her relationship dies, a woman cooks terrible dishes for her boyfriend in hopes of bringing them back together. This story was actually workshopped. It was a lovely workshop. Now in October, I'm currently writing a short story. It doesn't really have a title, but it's about a buffet. And that's all I'm going to say because I have not finished it. This is the part of the video where we get into the Q&A. So the first question is, can you tell us a bit about a project you're excited to start working on? So I don't think I have one that I'm excited to start working on, but I am excited to get started on the new subplot of Seventh Virtue. I just need to do it. I've been trying to do it since like the beginning of August, and I just never end up doing it because other subplots keep getting in the way. Basically, the squad is going to go to the Peterson estate. If you know my boy Darren, you know. If you're from like 2019, you might have heard about Darren. He's the best, and his family, like they own an estate on this giant property, and it's gonna be so aesthetic to write about, and it's probably gonna be like the fun and games section, you know, if we're gonna quote the hero's journey. So next question is, I'd love to hear if you have any characters or character dynamics that you're currently really excited about. I'm really excited to write Reeves' siblings. She has her brother, that's Lonan. They share a mother, and then she has her sister, And then she has another sibling named Chris, and I'm missing something. They have there's too many children in that family. I have not written with any of them besides Reeve and Lonan in a really long time. So I really missed writing with Anna, which her name used to be Christiane. Anna, who is Reeve's older sister, and then Chris, who is the youngest sibling. They just haven't shown up in the books in a long time, but I'm really honestly very excited to write with Darren and Reeve again. I was contemplating adding a point of view just in Reeve's head, and I might still, just so that I can see Darren and Reeve interact, because they have the best romance I think I have ever written. So the next question is, say a random stranger finds a book full of your writing on the ground and is tasked to psychoanalyze you based on only your work. What conclusions would they draw? So definitely some homicidal tendencies. Definitely in Feeding Habits, they'd be like, is this person watching a lot of Hannibal? And then for Seventh Virtue, I don't know, that I'm really disorganized and all over the place, because that book is also all over the place. It keeps writing itself so quickly that I don't have time to go back and revise it. Next question. You've been writing the same series for a while, and recently you talked about character progression. What advice would your older characters have for your younger characters? This is a really sweet question. We'll do it for the main four, which is Foster, Lonan, Reeve, Harrison. What would Foster give advice for his younger self? I think to have more fun, because now he's in a position where he just can't do anything different in his life. Lonan's would be, don't be so mean to Harrison, because you can see how that ended up working out. Harrison's advice would be to be more open to his mother, because that relationship, now that it's been rekindled, though very still imperfect, is probably one of the best things in his life. For Reeve, maybe care less about people, even though she is the kind of person who doesn't really care about people. The reason why she's kind of emotionally unavailable now is because she spent so much for younger years trying to be the person that could please every single person. The next question is, are your earlier dystopian books still canon to this series now? So I kind of answered this during the writing update. Sort of. Yes. Kind of. Not really. Kind of. So obviously the relationships are somewhat similar. Some of them I've probably had to tweak a little bit. Obviously Lonan and Harrison's origin story is completely different in Seventh Virtue. It is not the same, because that was a lot of work to do across book 3 to 6 was their romance arc really started. I can't do that same sort of redemption arc anti-hero thing with Lonan again. No. We're just doing it starting as a regular old romance. So some of the canon is the same. Obviously with the relationships are generally similar, but in terms of scenes, I'm adding some of the scenes in I mentioned, but a lot of it has sort of shifted. I've forgotten about major events that sort of happened that would have shaped the books, cut out characters that are really irrelevant. So it's somewhat canon. I'm in grade 12 in Ontario and thinking about going into creative writing instead of science or math like I'd planned. How did you know creative writing courses were for you, and what is a creative writing course really like? So to clarify, I am in a creative writing program. It is not in an English department, so it is just writing. I don't have to take English classes. I did take a lot of English classes last year as electives, and they were very hard. It just so happened that I was a writer from a very young age. I decided I wanted to study creative writing from an extremely tender age. I was about 15. I started writing when I was 13, and by that point, when I was 15, I finished probably about 5 or 6 books. It just seemed like the thing to do. I think when I was in grade 8, I had thought, oh, I'll go study English. And then when I hit grade 9, I realized English is my least favorite subject. I don't really like English. I so happened to have extremely supportive parents, and from that point when I was 15, I decided, you know what, if I want to go to this program, blah, 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 and I want to get this major, I want to be able to pay for it. So I worked really hard and I got a renewable scholarship that I have to work really hard to keep. And I managed to keep it through the pandemic, through second year. So when I was in high school, I was working extremely hard. I was so stressed in grade 11, but especially in grade 12, because I needed that scholarship. If I didn't have that, I don't know, if I would have studied writing where I am, maybe I would have done the writing English sort of thing, which I know a lot of Ontario programs are set up like that. Since I applied, I think there are some newer programs. What's a creative writing course really like? I mean, it kind of depends. The workshops are workshops. So this is going to differ. I highly recommend go to open houses. I started open houses when I was in grade 11. It really saved a lot of stress because I already knew basically where I wanted to go from a very early age. Highly recommend visit the school. It's very helpful. grateful for getting all your questions answered. I think a lot of people think writing courses are lecture heavy. If you think like any of like the stuff that I talk about in my craft videos comes from lectures, a majority of it does not. So most of the craft stuff that you get in these videos is just me being a nerd thinking of writing theory. For me, where I am, we're not like how to write this or how to do that. Some of the courses are like that, but they're gonna range in level from intro classes to the more advanced classes are gonna be your workshop. It's a lot of reading and it's a lot of writing. If you want advice on doing your creative writing degree in a pandemic, I am an expert, but it's going to differ person by person where you're at when you enter. I wouldn't say I was an advanced writer when I entered, but I was not really at a beginner level when I entered for my degree. And so that's going to change how much you learn, how much you take away, how much you contribute. The next question is, do you write romance in your novels? If so, what are the novels? And how is that experience? Also, what do you think of your skills writing romantic relationships? I don't see you mentioning this a lot, even though I might have heard you wrote some couples. I'm extremely insecure about writing this because I myself have never fallen in love or experienced a relationship. Same, I get you. I do write romance in my novels. Like basically Moth Work, the series, is a romance series. Oops, I don't know how that happened because I'm not very good at writing romance. I talked about this in the Fostered birthday video. I've written a romance in basically every single one of my novels. I don't think my skills are very good. I can write the romance between Lona and Harrison just because I know them as people. Beyond that, I don't know. The final question for this video is, I'm 15 and I'm constantly comparing myself to other writers my age who have written more novels than me. I've never written any books and I'm struggling to even finish the one I'm currently writing. Any advice? I have 2 videos on this. The last one I just posted hopefully will address this concern, but if you're just 15 and you're worried about not writing a novel, don't worry. You are extremely young and you have so much time. You don't need to compare yourself to other writers your age, because writing a novel at 15 is like really, really hard. The fact that you are going down that route, the fact that you are writing in general is an accomplishment. And you don't need to write a novel in order to be a valid writer. It's something we don't talk about enough on authortube, but something I'm very passionate about. Just because you don't write novels doesn't mean you're not a writer. So many writers write poetry. What are we going to say to poets? If we say that, oh, you're not valid unless you have a novel out, what about poets? Short fiction writers, I write a lot of short fiction. A novel doesn't have to be like the signal to you being a writer. It just happens to be a form that you can write, but it doesn't have to be the form that is the be all end all. I understood what it was like to be a 15-year-old who wanted to be like this level of prolific. I had goals in my head for myself, and when they weren't happening, I was disappointed. And if I were to give my advice, it would be like, just wait and see like where you will get in another 5 years. You have a lot of time and it's fantastic. You're starting so young, so you are like ahead of the game. Some adults can't finish novels, so it doesn't really matter like what age you are. It's no problem at all. I found it was hard when I was like starting out to hit the novel word count. And before then I was just writing little novellas, and that's kind of what brought me the most joy. So tailor the process to what's making you happiest versus what you think you should do is my biggest advice. So that's going to be the end of this video. What are you working on? And how was your summer of writing? But for now, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in another video. Bye.